Okay, this is going to be, I think, the 8th podcast, but this time there is no one else. So I do have questions from Twitter that I'm going to answer and other points I'd just like to generally address. And if any of you are actively listening to this, there is a channel that you can put questions in that I will watch. I'm not going to address the people by name who ask these questions because I don't want to be the one to butcher the names because I know it's going to happen. Um, if you would like to see where the questions are coming from, you can find that on Twitter. So someone said, do you think life in America will change if Biden wins? In which direction will it change and how? Um, I think it will change. There's going to be multiple ways it would change. It really depends on how you're asking that because Biden is a Democrat and our last president was a Republican, so there are going to be some ways that is going to change in how the US is run. So, I mean, yes, in that sense, it will change. I think in the start, things will be slightly different because there's most definitely going to be a lot of uproar from people about who wins if in the case that Biden does win. But I don't think long term there's going to be any like actual effects other than simply settling into having a new president after 4 years. Someone said, if Biden wins, do you think Trump is going to start something with his army of Trumpsters? In which major changes do you think need to be done to improve the overall situation in America regarding the education system, health and justice systems, ICE, etc.? If Biden wins, I don't think Trump is going to directly sort of command his army of followers to do anything, considering it is very apparent that they will themselves do it, because I think a lot of them already are, or at least thinking about doing it, if what I've seen on Twitter is enough to go by. Because I think if Trump was to openly say, yeah, go ahead and attack them, he'd get so much backlash, and that might potentially ruin his chance for running for president in 2024. So I think he has enough sense to not do that to himself, unless he really just, for whatever reason, wants to fuck up his chance. Major changes in the United States. I think there's a lot of problems in lots of different systems in the United States education system. There's a lot of varying degrees of education, such as in poor communities they don't have as good as education as in uh, richer communities. I mean that's an obvious thing, but I think there are things within the school system, like not regarding the money that's put into them, but just the system itself. I think yes, there needs to be some changes because um, there's been lots of problems with bullying, which I think that's something they've tried to tackle for so many years, but things aren't really getting better. Um, just all over, like the lack of technology in some schools puts some kids at a disadvantage, and also just the way some schools work also puts kids at a disadvantage. I know Sol and I talked about this in a podcast a few months ago, the idea of advanced classes and stuff. I know AP classes are a good thing, it gives you college credit for stuff, but I think starting advanced classes and stuff at such a young age and like the enrichment classes, I don't think that's the best idea. Like, I understand the theory behind why they need to exist, because obviously there are some kids who will get bored or tired of too easy classes, and that's why they have those, is to keep them entertaining, keep them actually doing their work. But I think starting them at such a young age, at least, is not the best idea. It leads to burnout in kids. I know a lot of people talk about this, how their kids start they're really smart and they're put into these classes and they do really well, but once they hit a certain point, it's just sort of, I guess, not too hard, but just too consuming for them. And they hit this burnout stage where they just don't want to try at it anymore. So I think that sort of needs to be looked at again. And the health system of America, yes, there needs to be changes, whether that be on the government side of things, making healthcare more available to people. I know, I mean, obviously things in the healthcare department are really expensive, and there's obviously a reason there is, but I know that makes it not easily accessible to a lot of people. On the other hand, there is looking at the medical department side of things, where I know there's a lot of places that are really bad at their jobs for whatever reason, whether it be like the customer service side of things or just actual medical stuff. But I think that can go for any job, really. There's a lot of people, which, I mean, it's understandable that this happens, but there's a lot of people that just don't do their jobs properly and slack. I know there's not really anything that you can do about that, but, like, it's just something that sort of goes along with this. The justice systems. Yeah, I think over the past few months, especially, we've seen some problems in our justice systems. Whether or not the things that we think are problems are really justified or not, I think it really depends on your point of view. Because I know there are a lot of people that will say there is no issues whatsoever with the things that happened in the trials back during the big part of the Black Lives Matter movement. But if you're on the side that's within the Black Lives Matter movement, you would obviously see some problems. And I agree, there's problems there, and there's things that need to be fixed there, and I think there needs to be a more unified way on how people interpret what they do within the justice system, because there's people that interpret the Constitution word for word, and there's people that interpret it how it would affect modernly, and there's people that interpret it to their own gain. So I think there needs to be a sort of middle ground that everyone follows. Because if no one interprets the Constitution the same way, and that's what you're going off of, there's going to be some discrepancies. Someone says, if he wins, do you think Biden will perform as president? And who do you want the Democratic nominee that would go up against Trump to be, if not Biden? If Biden wins, I think he definitely has the potential to perform well as a president. It's more the circumstances that would affect him. I think he has good plans, and I think he has the resources to do this stuff. But there is a lot of debate over his health, whether or not he has dementia, which would obviously affect whether or not he can perform well as a president. Depending on the backlash, I think many people have talked about how they fear that they're going to try to get Biden out of office. Who knows if that would happen? But I mean, it's definitely a possibility, especially in this year. But I think if he receives enough backlash and if people come across him enough, it will, I mean, obviously affect how he performs as the president. If Biden wasn't running, who would I want him to go up against? Politics was never my forte before this. I always stayed out of it. It was I mean, I never really had an input on it, so I don't really know who I'd prefer to go up against him, I suppose. Do I think Biden's ties with Ireland will have anything to do with the election or the future election? I don't think Ireland would be the one to do anything. I have heard concerns over Biden interfering with Brexit if something was to go on there. That was a little while ago. With this election, I don't think of Ireland as the place that would intervene in an election. I know there's been conspiracies and threats that like China and Russia were going to interfere with the election, but I don't think Ireland would. And I don't really see why they would. I know his cousin from Ireland was campaigning with him, but as far as I know, there's nothing really going on the side of truly intervening with it. One point I'd like to address that is not a question is people keep asking, like, where do you think the United States is going to head after this in the future, in the long run, not just like the next 4 years, but, you know, like, what do you think needs to happen to fix the US as an entirety, right? So right now we are in a point where the government is slowly becoming more controlling, even though it has not truly reached like the state of a dictatorship or anything. I mean, anyone can see that it is more controlling than it used to be, especially since like the United States was founded, right? And the United States was founded, we had this sort of makeshift government, right? And right before that is when we hit sort of a little point of anarchy, I suppose, fighting the British during the American Revolution. And right after that is when they formed a government, and it worked, sort of. They reformed it, they had a good government. And since then, it has obviously changed as times have changed, and it's just a general cycle of any government. You start with a point of leniency, and each time, whatever that time may be, it gets more and more strict as more rules are imposed to control the people more, to, control the government more, whatever. You're going to hit a point at some point where the government cannot function anymore, and there's a state of anarchy. And a state of anarchy is what's going to bring back a better government in the eyes of the people, right? So what I think is going to happen at some point, obviously, and what potentially might need to happen to some degree, is going to be that state of anarchy. We are currently trying, as activists, to fix the United States government. You can't really fix the people because you can't change people's minds. As much as you try, it's very hard to, right? But we need that state of anarchy where you can't change the pre-existing government. There's so much rooted down in there. It's just going to be impossible. With the state of anarchy, it is possible to rebuild a new government in the way whatever we see fit at the time. And at that point, I think we will start having a better government. But after, as the cycle is, it will get more controlling as it goes on. We will hit another point of anarchy at some time. The Electoral College, I know, is something else people keep asking about, whether or not it's a good or bad thing. I think in some senses it's a good thing, but sometimes it also isn't. The United States prides itself on being a democracy so much, yet they aren't. They're a constitutional republic. They vote through representation. That's why the popular vote isn't always the winning person in the election. And there are some states that are legally bound to vote as the people see, which is more of a democracy. But there are some states where the people of the Electoral College can or illegally change their minds and vote how they see, which is why the election doesn't always turn out the way they predict it. I know in the 2016 election, I think there was 3 people who voted against what the state wanted. I think it was like 2 for Trump and 1 for Hillary, possibly. I don't remember. But in some states, the Electoral College is good because there are people who are obviously going to vote with no opinion whatsoever. They're just going to pick someone and go with it. There are people who are going to vote solely based on party. There's people who are going to vote solely based on person. And so that if enough people do that, you have this result that's not really based in what's best for the country. And I do know that, like, if enough people do that, that's obviously going to affect the electoral vote, right? If they are going with what the state wants. But if we just had everyone by themselves vote, that would be a democracy, because that is truly the people's vote, right? But also, then you do have the people that sort of don't vote at all, and in that sense, their voice isn't being represented. And then the people that vote based off of whatever thing they're voting off of that's not an actual political opinion, right? I mean, I know obviously based on person, based on running mate party is a political opinion, but I'm talking about based on their plans and their values and stuff. Does anyone else? Oh, here's a question. How would anarchy impact the US presidents in international matters? The government is what controls international matters, right? The people don't do that. They're not in power to do that. It's the leaders of the country. That's how it works. If we didn't have a government, obviously there wouldn't be any people in power to actively do that. But I don't think it would affect it in its entirety unless it was things like trade, I suppose any active war agreements, like if you had agreed to help a country in war, because if there was let's say there was a war going on in some country that we had an agreement to help with, I don't think the people would be able to organize a military to actively help them in that, and that would obviously affect our relationship. But things simply like being on good terms with another country, I don't think that would be affected. I think it would, you know, sort of just stay stable until a new government was formed. And after that new government was formed, that might be when these things start getting affected. When whoever decides to lead the country next would decide against certain policies we already had, you know. The United Nations, I think that possibly would, I mean, you know, it would be affected because, you know, it's based on whatever, like, keeping peace. Obviously, yeah, if we can't do anything military-wise as an anarchy, that wouldn't really be a problem. But I mean, if we had, you know, they deal with keeping security in nations, right? That's going to be something hard to maintain as a general population. I know if we went into a state of anarchy, there would definitely be government things leaked. There'd be no one here to stop us from trying to leak things in other governments. So that would certainly be a problem. Yeah, I think Trump did want to leave the UN. I don't know, actually. Trump wanted to leave the World Health Organization. If we went into a state of anarchy, yes, crimes would be treated differently because if we didn't have the government, that would mean we didn't have a true, like, police force. There would definitely be people that try to handle it themselves. There's people that try to do that now anyway. And I think in the process of trying to rebuild whatever government we were trying to rebuild, it would definitely reform the police and whatever law enforcement we had. And yeah, because there'd definitely be people that try to do it a lot differently than other people. Because you have people like the little armed militia groups who go to protests and say, we're here to stop the protests with our guns, and we will drive cars through the crowds. In some way, I think that is sort of their own way of law enforcement, because obviously the riots were a bad thing in some ways. Like just pure chaos of them, I guess. And there were police there, but then you had the armed militias trying to stop it as well. So we'll have people like that trying to stop crimes, but we'll also have people like the people in the Black Lives Matter movements who are going to try to be really lenient on things. I suppose some of them would definitely make reforms in how people deal with them. If we had like actually trained police officers at this point in time, they would fix something with the way de-escalation is handled, because I know that's a big problem that's going on. But how would homicides be dealt with? Honestly, I really don't know. I know nowadays it's pretty simple as, oh, you killed this person. We have evidence that you did. We're going to take you to court. I don't know. It could either go one of two ways. Either you killed them, we're going to arrest you without question, and you're going to be put in jail. Or we're going to investigate this as much as we possibly can. And so I think it's going to start out there and try to find a happy medium. It's going to be hard to do, though. Any state of anarchy that we go into definitely will be difficult because of how divided the United States is right now. I think now is the best and the worst time for that to happen, if it were. Because one, it's a good time, I suppose, because now is when all of the problems are arising. Now is when we're realizing what we need to do. But it's also a bad time because of the state the United States is in. You know, you have such opposing sides, and people that absolutely refuse to agree with each other will attack each other based off of opinions. And there's obviously the chance that if there was a state of anarchy, there would be different sections that would branch off and start their own thing. Sort of like the Civil War. You had the South that was fighting to keep their slavery, and then the North that wanted to abolish it. Obviously, that's not a current problem that we're fighting over, really, but there's definitely other things that would create different sections like that. Do I think civil war is highly possible? Depends on what you would say is civil war. There is sort of a tiny civil war going on right now, like on paper, on the internet. People are fighting. I do definitely think that at some point there are going to be at least attempts with armed militias from whatever side. I don't know, but there's definitely at some point going to be somewhere, no matter how big or small it is, people that are going to try to physically fight. And if fighting breaks out, yes, I think if it's bad enough, we will have what happened back in like Oregon, that